I never thought I'd be left out in the cold by my own daughter. I never imagined the man she married would strip me of my dignity in my lowest moment, and that she would let him. But what they didn't know was that life had one last card for me to play. And when I played it, everything changed. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and until not long ago, I believed in something called unconditional love, especially when it came to family. I built my life around my husband and our daughter, Amanda. Every meal I cooked, every holiday I planned, every dollar I saved was for them. I had a purpose: to be the wife and mother they needed. But when my husband passed away from cancer last year, it felt like the floor vanished beneath me. I wasn't prepared for that kind of loss, not even a little. But I told myself I still had Amanda. I still had my daughter. I sold the house my husband and I had built from scratch in Cedar Park, just north of Austin. Too many memories. Too many nights waking up expecting to hear his voice calling from the kitchen. But it was just silence. I tried to tell myself that Amanda and her husband, Chad, would be there for me. She said I could move in with them for a while. At least that's what she promised. But I didn't realize that the moment I stepped into their home, things would never be the same. When I moved in, I didn't feel like I was part of their lives anymore. Chad barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. Amanda greeted me with a distracted smile and a brief hug. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but I tried to push those thoughts away. After all, it was just temporary, right? I kept to my small room in the back, trying not to make waves. I cooked meals, cleaned the house, and offered to run errands, just trying to be helpful. I told myself I was doing my part, staying out of the way, not wanting to add to the tension. But every time I caught Chad's eyes, they looked at me like I was a problem. His eyes were filled with irritation, like I was a splinter under his skin. It started with the small things. He'd roll his eyes whenever I asked a simple question. If I was watching something on TV, he'd change the channel without a word. Once, I heard him mutter under his breath, "Freeloader," as he passed by me in the hallway. I tried to convince myself I hadn't heard him correctly, but deep down, I knew I had. And Amanda, she never said anything. She just played it down. "He's stressed," she'd say. "Work's been tough." I swallowed the shame and stayed quiet. That's what mothers do, right? Stay quiet and take it. But that night, oh, that night, it shattered me. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I had made chicken pot pie, Chad's favorite. Amanda was scrolling through her phone, as usual, and Chad was sipping on his beer, barely even looking up. The silence was heavy, thick, almost suffocating. Then out of nowhere, Chad spoke. "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." My breath caught in my chest. The words cut through me like a knife. Amanda froze. I stared at Chad, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smirked, like it was all just a joke to him. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills to pay, and we didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I looked at Amanda, desperate. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everyone's sake, if you find something more stable." Her words, those words, they struck me like a slap. It wasn't just what she said, it was the fact that she said nothing else. No support, no defense, just silence. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just stood up, grabbed my things, and walked to my room. 2 suitcases. That's all I had left of my life. I didn't even cry while I packed. The tears came later when I stood outside their building, the wind biting through my coat, and realized I had nowhere to go. Amanda didn't walk me out. Chad didn't even bother pretending to care. I sat on the curb, my phone dead, my heart dead. For an hour, I sat there, in the cold, just staring at nothing. That's when I realized it. I had been erased. I checked into a motel that night, the kind where the wallpaper peels and the vending machine eats your change. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything could turn so cold, wondering what I had done to deserve this kind of abandonment. The next morning, I sent Amanda a message. I understand. I love you always. No reply. A week went by. Another message. Another week. Another message. Silence. 3 months passed. Each day felt longer than the last. I applied for jobs, anything. But no one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent work history. I considered cleaning houses or babysitting, but my body didn't move the way it used to. The loneliness, the isolation, it was suffocating. Worse than that, the shame, it was crushing. How could Amanda turn her back on me so easily? One evening, as I was going through a box of old family keepsakes, things I thought I had left behind, memories I thought I'd never need again, I found it. My mother's old diary. I hadn't read it in years, maybe never, but something pulled me to it. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, turned the pages, and that's when I found it. A name, a truth, a secret that changed everything. I remember the moment clearly. My hands shook, my heart raced, because suddenly, I wasn't just the mother who got kicked out of her daughter's life. I was someone else entirely, and for the first time in months, I smiled. They took everything from me, but they had no idea what was coming next. I couldn't explain it, but when I found my mother's diary, something inside me clicked. It wasn't just the shock of what I'd uncovered. It was the realization that, even though my world had fallen apart, I still had pieces of me left to rebuild. That diary. It wasn't just a book. It was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't forgotten. Not really. The days following that discovery were a blur. I didn't want to think about how I ended up in a rundown motel room, how the woman I had been, the one who held the family together, who cooked meals and shared holidays, had been cast aside like I was disposable. But as I read those words in my mother's diary, the memories of my past seemed to come alive again, fueling me with a sense of purpose I hadn't had in months. My hands trembled as I read on. The entries in the diary told a story of love and regret, of a woman who had been hiding secrets for years, secrets that, unbeknownst to me, were woven into the fabric of my very existence. As I turned each page, I uncovered truths that changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, and about my past. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading the entries. My mother's words began to paint a picture of a life I never knew existed. There was a name, Harold James Sterling. I didn't recognize it at first, but as I read, the truth slowly unraveled. Harold James Sterling, the founder of one of the biggest oil companies in Central Texas. A man my mother had known in ways she never dared to tell me. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mind raced, my heart pounded. Why hadn't my mother ever told me about him? Why hadn't she told me the truth? As I continued reading, I found more. Details about a secret relationship, whispers of a promise made in the event of her death, a trust for me, though it wasn't officially recognized. The words were carefully written, cautiously detailed. My mother had been protecting me, Even in death, the truth was there, hidden between the lines. I didn't cry. Not then, not yet. Instead, I felt something stronger rise within me. Power. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't powerless. I wasn't just the woman left out in the cold. I was someone else now. Someone who had a reason to fight back. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. I had to do something. I couldn't let this secret slip away like everything else in my life had. This was my chance. My chance to take control of my future, to reclaim what had been taken from me. I searched for Harold James Sterling. I didn't know where to start, but the diary mentioned a lawyer, Leonard Goldstein, the estate lawyer. I typed his name into the search bar of the motel's shared computer, praying for something, anything, that would lead me to him. And there it was. Leonard Goldstein, retired, still listed under a private firm in Dallas. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think twice. I wrote a letter. A real handwritten letter explaining who I was, who my mother was, and begging for a conversation. I needed answers. I needed closure. I sent it off and waited. 2 weeks later, I received a letter back. When I opened the envelope, the letter inside was short but direct. Leonard Goldstein wanted to meet me. It was real. I wasn't dreaming. This wasn't just some fantasy. It was happening. The moment I got the letter, I knew I had to go. I couldn't wait any longer. I packed my things, 2 suitcases just like the ones I'd left with, but this time, I wasn't going to some cold motel. I was going to Dallas. The bus ride to Dallas felt like an eternity. My mind kept racing. I tried to imagine what it would be like to meet this man, this stranger who held the keys to a part of my life I never knew existed. Would he really have something for me? Or was it all just some cruel trick? When I walked into Leonard Goldstein's office, I knew immediately that this was real. The smell of old books, the silence in the air. It all felt like stepping back in time, back to a world that wasn't mine. Leonard Goldstein was an older man, his eyes kind but wary, as though he had been expecting me, but had no idea what to say once I was actually there. I could barely keep my hands from trembling as he handed me a sealed envelope. The envelope was yellowed, fragile. The paper inside was equally old, the handwriting unmistakable. Harold James Sterling had written me a letter. I read it twice, then again. His words were filled with regret, with an admission that he had kept me a secret from the world. His daughter, born out of mistake and desire. And yet, he had promised my mother that if anything ever happened to him, I would receive a portion of his personal assets. Untraceable, it was all there, in black and white. I stared at the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, the ownership papers. The total value of it all was over $1 million. I didn't scream. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding the papers in my hands as the weight of it all settled in. I didn't go back to Austin right away. I couldn't. Something inside me had changed. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I wasn't just the woman who had been kicked out of her daughter's life, tossed aside like a piece of garbage. I was someone else now. Someone who had been lied to her entire life. And finally, I knew the truth. I stayed in Dallas for a few more days, not for the inheritance, but for myself. I walked through neighborhoods I couldn't afford, sipped coffee in quiet cafes, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitter about the life I had lost. Instead, I felt empowered. The pieces were falling into place, and I was ready to take back control. When I returned to Austin, it wasn't to the same woman who had left. I booked a short-term rental downtown, in a clean, modern apartment, far from Amanda and Chad's apartment. I started dressing differently, more polished, more deliberate. I was still invisible to them. But this time, it was a different kind of invisible. The kind that got me through doors I'd never dreamed of opening before. I can still feel the weight of the papers in my hands. The ones Leonard Goldstein handed me in his quiet office that day. My fingers trembled as I traced the edges of the envelope, knowing that inside was something that would change my life forever. A part of me was terrified to read it. What if it was all a mistake? What if I had been led to believe something that wasn't true? But the other part of me, the stronger part, knew I had no choice. This was my truth, buried for years, hidden in plain sight, and it was mine to uncover. When I finally opened the envelope, I read the letter slowly. Harold James Sterling, my father, the man who had been a ghost in my life, had written to me long before I knew his name. His handwriting was careful, measured. He spoke of regret, of things left unsaid, of a love he couldn't act on, and the life he had built without me in it. He admitted everything. He'd loved my mother, but he was too much of a coward to claim me as his daughter. He kept his distance, all the while promising my mother that if anything ever happened to him, I would have something to remember him by. Something that could never be traced to him or his family. I don't know how many times I read those words, but each time, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. $1 million, a trust, a legacy, buried and hidden. But now, it was mine. But it wasn't just the money that mattered. It wasn't the wealth that had been passed down to me like a cruel inheritance. It was the truth. I wasn't just some widow with nothing to her name. I wasn't just Margaret, the forgotten mother. I was someone. The tears came then, not from relief or joy, but from something deeper. I was no longer the woman who had been thrown out with 2 suitcases. I was no longer the woman who sat on a curb, abandoned and lost. I was her, the woman who had been forgotten, but who had never truly been erased. I could hardly contain myself as I walked out of Leonard Goldstein's office. The world around me felt different, sharper, more vibrant. I had purpose now. I had direction. I didn't go straight home. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to face Amanda and Chad yet. Not like this. Not when I had finally discovered the truth about who I was. Instead, I went to a small coffee shop in Dallas, sat at a corner booth, and allowed myself to breathe. I had a future now, a future I could build for myself, on my own terms. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about control. It was about taking the life I had been given and making it my own, no longer tied to the people who had cast me aside. And that's when I decided. I wasn't going back to Austin as the same woman who had been humiliated and abandoned. I wasn't going back to them. I was going back to take control, to reclaim what was mine. The first thing on my list? The apartment building. The one where Amanda and Chad lived. The one where they had tossed me out with barely a second thought. I knew they thought they were in control. They thought they could push me around, make me disappear. But they had no idea what I was capable of. By the time I arrived back in Austin, my mind was made up. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't need their approval. All I needed was the knowledge that I was in control now. I found a property listing buried on a real estate auction site. It was an old, distressed apartment building on the east side of town. Not glamorous, but it had potential. And more importantly, it was within my reach. Using the inheritance I had received, I formed an LLC, an anonymous shell company to shield my identity. I filed the necessary paperwork, transferred the funds, and placed the winning bid. In 2 weeks, the auction was over, and the building was mine. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. But I wasn't going to let Chad and Amanda think they had control of the one thing that could hurt them the most. The first thing I did was raise the rents. Not double, not even triple. I increased the rents to triple the market value, plus overdue fees. Every tenant would feel the effects of the price hike, but it was meant for Chad and Amanda. It was meant to make them squirm, to see how the tables had turned. I remember the day I sent out the notification letters. There was no fanfare, no dramatic scene, just a simple legal notice sent to all the tenants. For Chad and Amanda, it was a blow they never saw coming. It didn't take long for Amanda to call me. It was the first time she'd reached out since I left their apartment months ago. I let the phone ring, hearing her voice on the voicemail. Amanda. Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up, like, a lot. Chad's losing it. I don't know what to do. Can we talk? I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to respond. Not yet. The truth was, this wasn't about money. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about balance. It was about giving them a taste of what they had done to me. Letting them feel the weight of their actions. They had thought they could dispose of me. But now, they were going to see who I really was. The days after I purchased the apartment building passed in a blur. The power I now held, quiet, unspoken, but palpable, was something I had never experienced before. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew I wasn't just going to sit back and let the world pass me by. I had been invisible for too long. Now, I was in control. Chad didn't know it yet, but everything he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers. I began making small improvements to the building. Nothing too flashy, just basic repairs that would raise the overall value of the property. I fixed leaks, repaired broken locks, replaced flickering lights. All the while, I watched from the sidelines, enjoying the subtle shift of power in my hands. I remember the first time I saw Chad's face after the rent increase notification went out. He stormed into the office, demanding to know who was responsible. He was furious, pacing around like a lion in a cage, trying to find someone to blame. Chad had no idea who he was up against. I was no longer the woman who had been humiliated at that dinner table, tossed out like unwanted luggage. I wasn't just Margaret anymore. I was someone else. Someone who had learned how to survive by staying quiet, by observing, and by waiting. I wasn't planning to confront Chad directly. He had no idea who was pulling the strings. I kept to the background, but that didn't stop his anger from boiling over. I heard from the property manager that Chad had been demanding answers every week, growing more and more unhinged as the weeks passed. Amanda was quieter now. She still didn't reach out, and I didn't respond to her messages. The silence between us was suffocating. But I could feel something shifting. She wasn't the same person anymore. I saw it in her eyes when I passed her in the parking lot once. Her shoulders hunched, the weight of her choices wearing her down. But she wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. I knew Chad would never let this go. His ego was too big for him to accept defeat without a fight. I also knew that the more I let him flounder in the dark, the more desperate he would become. That desperation would lead him to make mistakes. Mistakes that would push him further into his own undoing. One day, the property manager called me, his voice tense. "Margaret, you need to come down here," he said. "There's been some issues with Chad. He's been poking around, asking too many questions."
I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I waited. I wasn't going to make a move too soon.
But I could feel the pressure building, the tension growing. It was time. I walked into the building's common room calm and steady. I had been in this position before, when I had to keep my emotions in check, when I had to be the strong one. I had to let Chad think he was still in control. But this time, the tables had turned. As I entered the room, I saw Chad. He stood by the door, his fists clenched. His face was twisted with anger, his body rigid with frustration. He hadn't noticed me yet. I walked toward the front, where the property manager was waiting. As soon as I stepped into his line of sight, Chad's eyes widened in disbelief. "You!" he spat, his voice thick with fury. "What is this? What kind of game are you playing?" I stood tall, my posture calm and confident. The woman who had once begged for scraps of dignity was no more. This was Margaret now, the woman who had learned that power didn't have to be loud. It just had to be present. I turned to the property manager, giving him a slight nod. Then I addressed Chad, my voice even, unwavering. "I'm the owner of this building," I said simply. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Chad's face went pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I didn't wait for him to process. I just kept going. "I'm the one who raised the rent," I continued, my tone soft but firm. "I'm the one who made the changes. I'm the one you'll be answering to from now on." Chad took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. "This is a joke, right?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just show up here and do whatever you want?" I met his eyes and held his gaze. No joke, just business. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning in the background. I watched as Chad's anger shifted, his face contorting in disbelief. He couldn't fathom that the woman he had pushed aside, the one he had humiliated, was now the one who held the cards. Amanda, standing in the corner, watched in stunned silence. Her hands were tightly clasped in her lap, her eyes wide. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she processed what was happening. But she didn't speak. She didn't try to stop it. I turned away from Chad, addressing the room. If anyone has questions about the changes or the improvements we're making, I'm happy to answer them after the meeting," I said, my voice cool. I glanced back at Chad, who was still rooted to the spot, his fists clenched, his face a mixture of fury and shock. Without waiting for him to respond, I walked toward the door, my steps steady and deliberate. I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. He knew, and I knew, that I had won this round. As I walked out of the room, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about something far deeper. Respect. The respect I had never been given. The respect I had to take for myself because no one else was going to hand it to me. The days that followed were strangely quiet. I didn't hear from Chad. I didn't hear from Amanda either, but the silence wasn't oppressive. It felt different. It felt like something had shifted between us. 2 days later, I received a message from Amanda. It was the first real message she had sent in months. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. "Amanda, I know things are bad right now, and I don't know how to fix it, but I need to see you. Please." I didn't respond right away. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure if she was ready to face the truth yet, but when I saw her again, standing in front of my door, looking like a shadow of the girl I had raised. Something inside me softened. She looked older, weary. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything. For what I let him do. For letting you go." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could forgive her. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I didn't know what to expect after the confrontation with Chad. Part of me thought he would come running back to me, yelling, demanding that I undo everything, take back the rent increase, and pretend like none of it ever happened. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Chad wasn't the type to admit defeat. Not easily, anyway. Instead, I watched as his world slowly began to unravel, not through anything I did directly, but because of his own choices. The property manager called me a few days later with some news. Apparently, Chad had started reaching out to the other tenants, asking them if they knew anything about the new owner of the building. He even tried to dig into the LLC that owned the property. He was desperate. I could feel it in every word the manager said. Chad was slipping, and every time he made a move, I felt the power I had gained grow stronger. He was like a man trying to hold on to the edge of a cliff, but with each desperate grasp, the ground beneath him crumbled a little more. One evening, I drove by the building just to check in on everything. As I pulled up to the complex, I saw Chad standing outside, pacing, his eyes scanning the surroundings like a predator. I had to stop for a moment, just to observe. He didn't see me. He was too absorbed in his frustration. But watching him, I felt a kind of vindication I hadn't expected. He was unraveling, little by little, and I didn't have to do anything. His own actions were the cause of it. I stayed there for a while, parked on the side of the road, just watching his temper grow. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that he was finally feeling the pressure, that he was finally experiencing the consequences of his cruelty toward me. But even though Chad was a mess, it was Amanda who stayed on my mind. I hadn't expected her to come to me so soon after the confrontation. I thought I would have more time to process everything. But there she was, standing at my door, asking to be let back into my life. Her visit had been a surprise. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she held the grocery bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked like she had run out of words, like everything she had been keeping inside her was too much to bear. But I didn't ask her what had happened. I didn't ask why she was here or why now. I just handed her a cup of tea and sat across from her, watching her fidget. She was clearly trying to gather her thoughts. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke. He's not who I thought he was," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I didn't see it before. I don't know what happened, but I'm scared now, Mom." I stayed quiet, not knowing what to say. I had to let her speak. She had to say it out loud for herself, even if I already knew what was coming. "He thinks someone's targeting us," she continued, her voice shaking with the weight of her words. "He's been going through my things, my phone, my emails. He's obsessed. He says someone's after us." Her voice cracked as she said it, and for a moment, I felt the old, familiar pull, the mother in me, willing to forgive, willing to comfort her. But that was the old Margaret, the one who had been used, the one who had been discarded. This Margaret didn't make excuses for people anymore. This Margaret had learned how to protect herself, and I wasn't about to throw it all away just because Amanda needed me to fix things. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you," she continued, her eyes downcast, "that I didn't even know where you were." I swallowed the lump in my throat, but I didn't speak. I let her sit in the silence. She needed to feel the weight of her choices. The silence between us was thick, suffocating even. It wasn't just the distance between us now. It was the things left unsaid, the spaces that could never be filled again. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I miss you, Mom," she whispered, "but I don't know how to fix it." I didn't know how to fix it either. I didn't know if I ever could. The truth was, I was still angry, still hurt by everything she had let happen. But something inside me softened. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying all the weight for so long, or maybe it was the realization that she was finally seeing the truth. But I couldn't fix it for her. Not anymore. She had to fix it herself. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. "You didn't just let him push me out, Amanda," I said, my voice firm. "You stood with him." She flinched at the words, her face crumpled, as if she had been slapped. And in that moment, I saw the hurt in her eyes, the guilt. She wanted to deny it, to tell me it wasn't true, but she couldn't. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. I was scared too. I thought it was the only way I could keep things from falling apart. "I know," I said softly. "I've been there. I know what it's like to be small because of someone else's fear. But you don't have to stay that way." She didn't answer. She just sat there, her head bent, lost in her own thoughts. I thought it was over after that. I thought Amanda would finally understand, that she would find the strength to stand on her own. But Chad wasn't done. He wasn't going to back down just because I had outmaneuvered him. A few days later, I received a strange envelope. No return address, no name, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Chad's. Inside was a letter. No, a threat. He knew about the building. He knew about the inheritance. He had connected the dots, and now he was coming for me. He wanted everything undone. He wanted to ruin me, expose the secrets I had fought so hard to uncover. But he didn't realize something. I had prepared for this. I didn't even flinch when I read the letter. I simply forwarded it to my attorney. I was done letting fear rule my life. As the days wore on, I watched from a distance as Chad's world continued to collapse. The tension between him and Amanda grew unbearable. It wasn't just the rent increase anymore, it was everything. His control over her was slipping, and he didn't know how to handle it. Amanda stopped calling me, and I didn't reach out either. But I could feel the cracks forming. She was seeing what I had already known. She was finally seeing Chad for what he truly was. Then, one night, the knock came. It was Amanda, standing at my door, soaked from the rain, her eyes red and swollen. She held something in her hands, something that made my heart skip a beat. She stepped inside, and without saying a word, she placed my mother's diary on the coffee table. "I found it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was in your closet when I came to visit. I didn't know it was yours, but I recognized her handwriting. I didn't know what it meant then. I just wanted something to make sense of everything." I didn't say anything. I just picked it up, held it in my hands, and let the silence speak for us both. She had finally opened her eyes. The rain had stopped, but the silence between Amanda and I still hung heavy in the room. She stood there, waiting for something, an answer, a reaction, maybe even forgiveness. I looked down at the diary on the coffee table, tracing the familiar, faded cover. It was my mother's voice in my hands. It had taken me a long time to truly understand the weight of her actions, how she had fought for me in her own quiet way, how she had loved me in silence. And now, as I sat across from Amanda, the weight of my silence was about to lift. Amanda took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. I didn't know. I didn't know what was in that book. I didn't know what it meant. I thought you were weak for staying away from us. Her voice broke as she said it,
But you weren't weak, were you?
I shook my head slowly, my voice soft but steady. No, Amanda, I wasn't weak. I was just trying to protect myself, trying to protect you. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, you would see what I was trying to do. She sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine for something, perhaps for answers, or perhaps for forgiveness. She had already apologized, but I could see that it wasn't just words she needed. She needed something more. She needed to see me as the woman I had become, not just the mother she had discarded. I never meant to hurt you, Mom, she whispered, tears spilling over, but this time they were different. There was remorse in them. There was regret. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I let Chad take control, everything would be fine. I didn't realize I was losing you. I didn't realize what it would cost us both. For the first time in months, I looked at my daughter and saw her again, not just the person who had let me down, but the little girl I had raised, the one who used to run to me for comfort, the one who had been lost in her own fears. And then it hit me. She had never been the problem. Chad had been. He had manipulated her, twisted her thoughts, made her feel like there was only one way out. I had never given her a choice to see the truth. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. Not for me. It was about understanding that she had been trapped too. Trapped by fear. Trapped by a man who had made her believe that silence and submission were the only way forward. I put the diary down and looked at her, my voice calm. You weren't the only one who was scared, Amanda. I was scared too, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stay there. Not when I knew that you would never see me as I was. You had to see it for yourself. I had to let you. Her eyes widened. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing to you. I thought I was protecting you, keeping the peace, but I wasn't. You were trying to protect yourself, I said softly. I understand that now. You didn't know any better. She wiped her eyes and nodded, her face flushed. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. Not right then, not fully. But I didn't need to forgive her to move forward. I just needed to accept her, accept the truth, and accept the fact that we both had a long road ahead of us. As I sat with Amanda that night, Chad was not far from my mind. I knew he was still fighting, still trying to hold on to whatever power he thought he had. But the truth was, he was already defeated. The power had shifted, permanently. I didn't hear from him directly again after the letter he'd sent me. But I knew. I knew the fight was over. The building had become my domain. The rent increase, the repairs, the improvements, every decision was mine now. Chad was forced to accept it. He didn't fight it legally because deep down, he knew that the law was no longer on his side. I had the resources. I had the connections. And more importantly, I had the truth on my side. Amanda and I, didn't discuss him much after that. There was no need. He was just a shadow now, a man who had already faded from our lives. I didn't care what he did next. He had already shown me who he was. A few weeks passed, and slowly, I began to rebuild. Not just the building, not just my life, but my relationship with Amanda. It wasn't easy. It never would be. There were still scars, still wounds that hadn't fully healed. But there was a foundation there, a starting point for something new. One evening, Amanda came by with a small box in her hands. She sat down next to me on the couch, her face nervous but hopeful. "I made this for you," she said, pulling out a painting wrapped in tissue paper. I looked at the canvas. It was an abstract painting, full of deep reds and golds, a phoenix rising from the ashes. Her voice trembled as she explained. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to make something for you, for everything." I stared at the painting for a moment, then at her. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was a sign. She was finally trying to heal, trying to give something back. I smiled softly and placed it on the wall. "It's beautiful," I said. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment, not needing words. For the first time in a long time, the air between us didn't feel heavy. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was living again, not just surviving. Months passed, and the building continued to thrive. I had turned my life around, not through vengeance, but through resolution. The lesson I had learned wasn't about getting back at people who hurt me. It was about owning my own story, owning the power I had within me, and knowing that I would never let anyone strip that away again. It was time to close that chapter of my life. The building, with all its memories and struggles, had served its purpose. It had been the catalyst for everything that came after. I sold the property in the spring, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to move on. I used the proceeds to donate half to a local shelter for women and children in crisis. I asked them to build a wing in honor of my mother, the woman who had taught me how to fight silently, how to survive in a world that didn't always see me. The other half went into a small savings account, the start of a new life, a new chapter. I bought a small house, nothing extravagant, just a little 2-bedroom home with a porch swing under the oak trees. It was the place I had dreamed of for so long. Amanda helped me move in. We didn't talk much as we unpacked, but there was no need. We had both come a long way. After the boxes were unpacked, we sat down on the porch swing, side by side, letting the quiet of the evening wash over us. Amanda looked at me and whispered, "I forgot what it felt like to be safe here." I squeezed her hand gently. "You were always safe here, sweetheart, and you always will be." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it.